What is up, everybody? Mr. Curtis here. Welcome to 7.5. We're getting there. This is kind of called Between the Wars, Rise of Totalitarianism, 1900 to 2001. We're really going to be focused. This video is really primarily on like the 1920s and 30s, kind of this period in between World War I and World War II. So let's rock and roll here. So here's the deal. After World War I, and this is a little, I guess we'll call this contextualization, even though it's in the same time period. So after World War I is over, there's a whole bunch of issues. And the first one, the main one, is that Treaty of Versailles, that awful, horrible, weak, no good, low life treaty, which essentially punished Germany horribly. Remember, they were forced to take responsibility for the war guilt clause. They had reparations they had to pay. They limited their military, lost their colonies. Basically just a huge embarrassment for Germany. And a new government took over that was not able to solve a lot of the problems that are going to come up. We have Italy and Japan who are upset at the treaty for not getting the land they want. We have our colonies that are upset because they didn't get the freedom they want. So we have all of these issues after World War I. And specifically in Europe, we have people who are upset at the treaty. The second thing that happens, which really is kind of the issue that really breaks the camel's back, if you want to say it, is the Great Depression. So we have these weak governments who are in Europe who aren't, after World War I, who are, especially in Germany, who are problematic. And then the Great Depression happens. And the Great Depression, because in the 1920s, we've become interconnected transnational businesses, we have this increased communication from the previous time period that allows overseas businesses, and a lot of connection and trade, that when one economy sinks, another economy sinks, and it leads to kind of a worldwide Great Depression. So you might have learned the Great Depression was in the United States, but it's really a worldwide and global phenomenon that's going on. We have the stock market crash in the United States, and that crash happens throughout the world. It's not just in the United States, but the US is kind of seen as one of the bigger crashes where prices of stocks just drop overnight. So you got your stock price that you own a share at $100 drops to $5 over the course of a couple of days, and you've just lost $95 a share. And if you have 1,000 shares of it, that's a big deal. If your retirement money is locked up in the stock market, you just lost your retirement. One of the issues in the Great Depression, it's not just the stock market crash. There's what's called the overproduction and underconsumption. Businesses in the 1920s were making a lot of products throughout the world, and people weren't buying those products. So you just have these warehouses like filled with stuff that aren't being sold, which leads to less money being made for these businesses. Also, we have this huge unequal distribution of wealth from the late early 1900s, especially from the Industrial Revolution, where you have these people who are super, super rich, and then most other people are just kind of like working class or poor. So this unequal distribution leads to kind of an unfair access to resources for these people who are lower income, and this is going to lead to the Great Depression. Also, we have these poor economic conditions. And what I want to mention is that when we have these poor economic conditions, when things are economically bad, citizens of countries allow their governments historically to limit freedoms. So in order to rebuild the economy, in order to make things better, they might say we're willing to give up some freedoms, little social contract almost, in order to allow the government more power and more control. So we're going to see that here. A couple of new governments emerged to solve these issues. So we've kind of had this like capitalist democratic push in the 18 and 1900s, and that capitalism led to this unequal distribution of wealth without too much oversight. And in order to fix these problems here, all right, new governments are going to emerge, especially in Western Europe. And the first one that we see is called fascism. And this word comes from an old Italian symbol from the Roman Empire called a fasces, which was a bundle of sticks wrapped around an axe head. And the Italians during this time period are going to take this symbol and use that symbol to kind of say, we're going to go back to this Roman Empire period, and they come up with this name, fascism. Fascism is hard to define. There's no like single definition, fascism, but there's some characteristics of it. So here's the deal with fascism. Fascism is totalitarian in nature, meaning total government control over all aspects of life. So similar to what we saw in the Russian Revolution under Stalin is similar here. We have propaganda, we have secret spies, we are going to limit people's freedoms, we're going to limit constitutional rights, those rights from the Enlightenment where like you can't have police enter your home without a warrant. That kind of stuff is out the window. You can just go into anyone's house. People beating each other up on the streets if they're going against the government. Extreme nationalism is a characteristic, and militarism. So we're going to build up our military to show the world that we are the best and most powerful country. We're going to get rid of this idea from the Treaty of Versailles that, like, for example, Germany has to limit their military, and instead we're going to show the world how powerful we are, and we are going to essentially regain our might in the world. In fascism, there's a hatred towards communism, which is ironic because really they're closer in most of their beliefs than anything else, but people in Europe are scared of communism. Wealthy and middle-class people and working-class people don't want to lose what little they have to this government where everyone's suddenly equal and we're sharing the wealth with people who maybe don't work as hard as the mentality as me. I don't want to lose my wealth. So in order to get people to turn against, because people are scared of this, they turn to fascism because fascism says we're going to fight against communism. Last is propaganda against enemies. I'm going to put enemies in quotes here because enemies are whatever the government defines the enemy as. It could be a foreign enemy from another country. It could be enemies within our country who aren't against fascism or aren't against our beliefs. Here's the deal with fascism. In Italy, the party that is going to be ruled, there's one party because it's totalitarian, and there's one party, and that party is called the Fascist Party, which I'm going to show you in a second. But I also want you to know that the Nazi Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, in Germany, which is going to be run by Hitler, is also a fascist party. So here's the deal. This is Benito Mussolini. He is going to take control after World War I of Italy. He is a fascist, so he is a totalitarian. And you're going to see some pictures of him here wearing his military uniform. Fascists tend to dress in military uniforms in order to show their power. So you can see him here. He was a veteran of World War I. You can see he's up high here. He's speaking down to a huge crowd of people. You have propaganda images. This is the Fascist Party headquarters in Rome at the time. And this is supposed to be, this is a carving of Mussolini's head. And you can see over it says CCCCCCC. Similar to that Stalin picture where he's looking down and this idea that Mussolini is always watching. And if you ever read the book 1984 is based on these totalitarian governments and this idea that Big Brother or the government is always watching you. He has his terror squad. They're called the Black Shirts. They go around, and anyone who is against Mussolini, if you write bad things about Mussolini, you speak out against Mussolini, his Black Shirts come in and just beat you up and arrest you. They have ultimate power over arresting who they want, assuming Mussolini is okay with it. His idea in Italy is going to take off, and he is going to be in charge in the 20s, through the Great Depression, into the 30s, and in Germany, another person by the name of Adolf Hitler, and this is him here, is going to also take on these fascist ideas, and he calls his party, or the party is called that he joins, and he eventually becomes the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Their nickname is the Nazis. I do want to point out that the term Nazi, if you get a time machine and you travel back to Nazi Germany, the Nazis didn't like to use the term Nazi. Nazi was kind of a derogatory term to them. They would call themselves the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And to use Nazi is kind of derogatory towards them, but we don't really care about being derogatory towards Nazis, so I'm just going to use Nazi. Same idea as Mussolini, same idea as this stuff with totalitarian and fascism. However, Hitler adds a few things. He is much more anti-Semitic than Mussolini is. He's much more this push towards anti-Jewish sentiment and trying to rile that up in people. He uses Jewish people as the scapegoat, which we'll get to later. Also, he wants to open up Germany more. Germany lost land as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's goal is to get rid of all the proposals and the different articles of the Treaty of Versailles and to go back and make Germany great again. So that's the goal. And he wants to create more living space for those Germans who he considers and the Nazi Party considers to be pure. One of the myths is that it's just blonde hair, blue-eyed people. That's like the ultimate goal. But if you have brown hair, brown eyes, you're not considered impure. The impure people are the people who aren't German. So you could be, according to them, so you could be a German Jewish person, you're not considered pure German. You could be someone who is Slavic from one of the countries from Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia, that region, you could ethnically not German, you are considered impure. So again, and also they want to go against the Treaty of Versailles. They want to get their land back. He says we're going to build up our military again, and what are they going to do about it? And he's going to challenge the world to stop him. Here's the deal with the Nazis and how they take over. So this party is organizing in the 20s. Hitler actually tries to overthrow the government in the mid-20s, and he's arrested and sentenced to jail. I think he's supposed to spend 5 years in prison, but he gets out for good behavior in 9 months. And his party is kind of seen as almost like a laughing stock. People push it off to the side in the 20s. But then in the late 20s, early 30s, the Great Depression happens. And the Weimar Republic, the new government from after World War I in Germany, is going to be hit with some horrible economic conditions. The number one thing that they are hit with through the 20s and especially into the 30s is this thing called hyperinflation. It's huge inflation. So Germany is hit with this in the 20s, and then the Great Depression hits. So, for example, this is the equivalent of German currency to the US dollar. So 4.2 German marks in 1914 equal $1. So if you exchange $1 in Germany at the time, you would get 4.2 German marks back. And again, this is before Hitler's rise to power. So, and then it was $14 marks for $1. And then by November of 1923, it's 4.2 trillion German marks equal $1. So if you went to Germany, you would exchange your your US dollar, and they would give you 4.2 trillion German marks. That's hyperinflation. Now they're changing the currency. So you can see this is 1 million marks here, which used to be 1,000 marks, and they just stamp it. So there's more of it. So you have more dollars or German marks in your pocket, but if you've been saving for college education or for retirement, your money is becoming worthless. That money that you have saved in the bank isn't worth as much as it does. In 1932, with this hyperinflation happening, with Great Depression happening, Hitler's party, the Nazi party, you can see how many seats they gained over time as the Great Depression hits. So before the Great Depression, the way it works in the Weimar Republic is there's a multi-party system. So unlike the United States, it's not just two parties. So the Nazi party won 12 out of 491 seats in 1928. They run again in 1930, a new election, and they win 108 seats. Then they win up 230 seats, which is 1/3 of the, and then 196. And then in March of 1933, they win 288 of the 647 seats. Hitler negotiates a deal essentially, and the Nazi party does, where Hitler is going to get temporary absolute power to change the economic system. Remember, in economic times, people are willing to give up their freedom in order for economic security. And in 1933, the Nazi party becomes the only party legal in Germany. And I want to point this out because a lot of people think Hitler went in with guns and killed everyone and took over. His party was elected, not with the majority, but with the most votes in the Reichstag in the German parliament. Hitler is very much going to focus, and we'll get into more of how he rules. I just want to get into the fascism and totalitarian aspects of it. But two kind of side notes to this that I want to point out is Hitler's very big into this with fascism in scapegoating. So like I said, the Jewish people are going to be blamed for the German problems. And specifically, he says that most Jewish people are in the banking industry, and the hyperinflation and the Great Depression was caused by Jewish people to hurt the Germans. Obviously not true, but you use a scapegoat. The second one is something called Lügenpresse. He refers to the media or the press as the lying press, the fake media, the lying press, and any news story that is bad for him or contradicts what the Nazi party says, he immediately stamps them as this Lügenpresse and the lying press. So people start doubting the stories that come out from the newspapers and magazines that are critical of Nazi Germany, and many Germans start believing that all the stories that are bad about Hitler, anything that talks about how the treatment of this certain group of people or what's happening in the economy, anything that's negative towards Hitler is immediately stamped that way. And then eventually, as Hitler gains more power, he will shut down those other press that are bad towards him. So there was only one kind of media, those that are supportive of him. Not everyone supports the Nazi party, and I want to point this out because it's important to know as we get into the Nazi party really being in control. We kind of assume that everyone in Germany was supportive. Some people spoke out, some people rebel, some people are killed as a result of being against it. Some people have underground support where they're trying to get people to go against them. But this picture is kind of a famous picture. This is from a boat docker, the people who work on the docks at a Nazi party rally. You can see everyone supporting here. And then there's this one guy right here and zooming in who refuses to salute. So I just kind of say, be that guy sometimes. Lastly, as a side note, while all these problems are going on, the U.S. is also dealing with this, and I do want to point out that the U.S. has their own response to this, which is not fascism. The U.S. response governmentally is what's called the New Deal, in which Franklin D. Roosevelt, who you can see right here, he was known for his fireside chats and kind of explaining people through mass media, using the press, using the media, this new radio source to explain his ideas. He comes up with a socialist type program, which is going to be a safety net. So if Americans fall as a result of this Great Depression and they're in poverty, the government will support you so you don't fall and hit the ground. There's a safety net underneath. And he comes up with government programs, work programs to rebuild roads and electricity for rural communities, and Social Security for people who are going to retire, so the elderly aren't broke now that they can't work anymore and they're retired. So this is going to be what happens in the United States. So we're shifting away from that capitalist laissez-faire, moving into a little more blended or mixed economy in the United States in order to solve the problems of the Great Depression. So that's a long video. I'm sorry, there's a lot here. We'll go through a lot more of this in class, some video clips and some of the stuff, but that's the overview of what you need to know for the AP exam. You got any questions, you write it down, you let me know.